Today we're going to take a step into the reader's advisory world and look at the genre or subgenre of alternative history. My name is Nancy Housel, and I'm a librarian here at the Kentucky Department for Libraries and Archives. And let's see, what else should you know about me? Originally from Louisiana, so if you hear a twang there that doesn't sound Kentucky, it could be a bayou sound there. With me today is Valerie Edgeworth. Valerie is also a librarian in the Department for Libraries and Archives, and Valerie's in the continuing education section. So I think you're in good hands today as we approach our topic of alternative history. As a former teacher of history, I would say that I've never really delved into alternative history until very recently. I had a family member who, once they found out I taught history, started talking to me about reading alternative history, so it's something that I've dabbled in just a little. But today we're going to talk about it and compare it to history in terms of nonfiction history and at historical fiction. We're going to look at see in what ways they may be alike and in what ways they might be different. So we're going to start off looking at some comparisons, and we want to kind of see what the characteristics are of those three: nonfiction history, historical fiction, and alternative history. And then I think once we get kind of a quick overview, then we're going to delve in particular detail about alternative history with suggestions about characteristics, why it is popular with some readers, what you can do as a reader's advisory when questions come to you at the front desk, and also give you some suggestions on where to go to find more information about the topic. So let's get started by looking at three titles. These are three titles. These are actual books. You can look them up on Amazon. And they each have Pearl Harbor as their main topic. So we have World War II, Pearl Harbor, from beginning to the end. We've got The Winds of War by Herman Wouk. And we have Harry Turtledove's Days of Infamy. So all about Pearl Harbor, but each has its own unique perspective. One of these titles is nonfiction history, one is historical fiction, and one is alternative history. So let's start by reminding ourselves of the characteristics of history nonfiction. History as nonfiction can be told in a variety of ways. It can be kind of told in a chronological order, much like what you might find in an almanac or a yearbook of a large event. It could be a book that's written from a very specific viewpoint of a particular event, like in this case Pearl Harbor, or a historical period. It's history nonfiction can be told through the personalities and relationships of that period that's being covered in the book, or it can be done through told the story through the description of specific things and their use from a particular historical period to the present. Nonfiction history is primarily told by historians or authors who seek to create a vivid story or an evocative description from vast amounts of research and evidence. Nonfiction history can use a variety of writing styles. The story can be short, the story can be long. It can be written in the most objective, factual way to a more provocative viewpoint. It can be written from an epic perspective, covering multi-generations, to just one brief specific period in time. The author can share their rigorous sources of research with us, or may be written in a more anecdotal way from conversations of people and personalities involved in the time being written about. Nonfiction history is attractive to readers mainly because they want to learn more about other people. They want to learn more about the world that they live in. Usually non-history fiction is written in such a way that readers can kind of sit down, read short bits whenever they have the time, or they can enjoy more story-driven works where they can lose themselves in the storytelling. Usually this writing has a strong sense of place and strong descriptions of the settings, which pulls the reader into the story. So let's talk about the characteristics of historical fiction. We're kind of briefly hitting history and historical fiction so that we can spend most of our time talking about alternative history. But I do want to tell you that we have had trainings in the past on historical fiction and nonfiction, which includes a section on history, and so those might be still available on the archived webinars page if you want more information about nonfiction, history, and historical fiction. The thing about historical fiction is that everything occurs in the past, and by the past, the National Historical Novel Society says that the past is anything that's at least 50 years in the past. So really, absolutely anything can happen in historical fiction as long as it happens more than 50 years ago. Historical fiction is often judged on how faithful it is to the time period and how well it evokes a picture of the past. This is attractive to readers who are looking for adventure and what they identify as a more exciting age. Others seek a respite in the sense that they see the past as being kind of a simpler, slower time, while others find perspective in the harshness and brutality of earlier periods compared to the relative comfort of their own time. All good historical fiction novels offer something important, and that is education. It gives us the chance to learn about earlier times and how people lived in them. To be effective, historical fiction requires careful research. Authors must immerse themselves in the time and place they plan to write about so that they can offer the same immersion to their readers. So that brings us to alternative history. Alternative history books really are a combination of two bigger genres, historical fiction, which we just talked about, and fantasy fiction. They pose a very specific kind of what-if question to the reader. What if our known human history had turned out differently? The author tinkers with the recognizable history to create what is referred to as a divergence point, and then crafts a story that follows this new alternative historical timeline. Though the story can diverge wildly from actual history, the author will take care to include historically accurate details along with the more speculative elements. Okay, so I'm going to put you to the test. Okay, so let's consider our first title, World War II, Pearl Harbor, A History from Beginning to End. And what we're going to do is going to send you out on the web to listen to a clip of this book. So we're going to bring up a box here, if I can get my cursor to work right. There we go. And so you want to put your cursor and click on World War II, Pearl Harbor, A History from Beginning to End. Let me make this a little bit bigger. There you go. Okay, when you click on the title, full title, then you'll see you get a link there that shows up at the bottom. And we're going to hit the Browse To button. And that will take us to Amazon. And you can see under the picture of the book, you're going to be able to click where it says Audible Sample. So follow me. We're going to click on Browse To. And we're going to look for the Audible Sample. Click there, and you should hear, if your speakers are on, you should hear a reading sample. Okay, if you will click on the red X up in the corner, that will take you back to the training class. Okay, so that is a sample from our first title. So what we heard is from the beginning of the book. As we go on, we learn about the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese on December the 7th, 1941, about this surprise attack while the two countries, the United States and Japan, were still officially at peace. So the attack on Pearl Harbor hurls the United States into the conflict of World War II, and one where the United States could no longer afford to remain isolated from the rest of the world. So the book tells us about the rising militarism across the globe. It talks about how the war spreads across the country. It talks about the impact of the attack on the people of the United States and about the increasing tensions until it leads up to the attack on Pearl Harbor. Okay, so that's number one. Okay, so here is our second choice, The Winds of War, which is written by Herman Wouk. This is Herman Wouk's narrative about the tide of global events. Includes a lot of drama, romance, heroism, and tragedy associated with World War II, including the attack on Pearl Harbor. So let's listen to a sample of this. So again, we're going to bring up our web link. So if you click in the white area of the box, The Winds of War, and then click on Browse To, it'll take you to Amazon. Look for the audio clip under the cover where it says Listen. Click there and we'll hear.
Commander Victor Henry rode a taxicab home from the Navy building on Constitution Avenue in a gusty gray March rainstorm that matched his mood. In his war plans cubbyhole that afternoon, he had received an unexpected word from on high, which, to his seasoned appraisal, had probably blown a well-planned career to rags. Now he had to consult his wife about an urgent decision. Yet he did not altogether trust her opinions. At 45, Rhoda Henry remained a singularly attractive woman, but she was rather a crab. This colored her judgment, and it was a fault he found hard to forgive her. She had married him with her eyes open. During an incandescent courtship, they had talked frankly about the military life. Rhoda Grover had declared that all the drawbacks, the separations, the lack of a real place to live and of a normal family existence, the long, slow climb through a system, the need to be humble to other men's wives when the men were a notch higher, that none of these things would trouble her because she loved him and because the Navy was a career of honor. So she had said in 1915, when the World War was on and uniforms had a glow. This was 1939, and she had long since forgotten those words. He had warned her that the climb would be hard. Victor Henry was not of a Navy family. On every rung of the slippery career ladder, the sons and grandsons of admirals had been jostling him. Yet everyone in the Navy who knew Pug Henry called him a comer. Until now, his rise had been steady. The letter that first got him into the Naval Academy, written to his congressman while in high school, can be adduced here to characterize the man. He showed his form early. May 5th, 1910. Dear Sir, you have sent me 3 kind have sent you, from my freshman year onward, reporting my progress in Sonoma County High School. So I hope that you will remember my name and my ambition to obtain appointment to the Naval Academy. Now I am about to complete my senior year. It may seem conceited to list my achievements, but I am sure you will understand why I do so. I am captain of the football team this year, playing fullback, and I am also on the boxing team. I have been elected to the Arista Society. In mathematics, history, and the sciences, I am a candidate for prizes. My English and foreign language German marks are not on that level. However, I am secretary of the small Russian-speaking club of our school. Its 9 members come from local families whose ancestors were settled in Fort Ross long ago by the Tsar. My best chum was in the club, so I joined and learned some Russian. I mention this to show that my language ability is not deficient. My life aim is to serve as an officer in the United States Navy. I can't actually explain this since my family has no seafaring background. My father is an engineer in the redwood lumbering business. I've never liked lumbering, but have always been interested in ships and big guns. I have gone to San Francisco and San Diego often just to visit the naval ships there. Out of my savings, I have bought and studied about 24 books on marine engineering and sea warfare. I realize you have only one appointment to make, and there must be many applicants in our district. If one is found more deserving than I am, I will enlist in the Navy and work up from the ranks. However, I have seriously tried for your consideration and trust that I have earned it. Respectfully yours, Victor Henry.
Okay, let's click on the red X in the upper right-hand corner and go back to our classroom. Okay, and let's listen to our last sample. This is from Days of Infamy. Let me get the right link up. Okay, so this is Days of Infamy by Harry Turtledove. What we are going to listen to is a clip of 2 Japanese admirals talking about the upcoming attack on Pearl Harbor and what might be done to shore up their surprise attack. So again, let's click on Days of Infamy, then click on the Browse to. And then under the book cover, click on where it says Listen.
Expressive eyebrows quirked upward as he spoke. Much more difficult, Yamamoto agreed. Well then, Gaynor said, why do we limit ourselves to an airstrike on Pearl Harbor? The Americans will rebuild, and then they will strike back at us. Yamamoto nodded again. Every word of this is true. It is one of the arguments I used against the operation. Should hostilities break out between Japan and the United States, it waved for Genda to go on. The younger man did. We should follow up on our strike at Pearl Harbor with a landing. If Hawaii is occupied, America will lose her best base. If we make this attack at all, we had better make it decisive. Yamamoto sat and considered. His face showed nothing. He was an outstanding bridge and poker player. Genda could see why. Well, Commander, no one will ever accuse you of thinking small, Yamamoto said at last. Tell me, have you discussed this proposal with Rear Admiral Onishi? That was exactly the question Genda wished he would not have asked. Yes, sir, I have, he answered unhappily. And his view is? His view is that, with our present strength, we cannot take the offensive in both the eastern and southern areas, Genda said, unhappily still. Rear Admiral Onishi is an airman's officer, Yamamoto said. He is also a very hard-driving, determined man. If he does not believe this can be done, his opinion carries considerable weight. How do you respond to his objections? By saying that half measures will not do against the United States, sir, Genda replied. If we strike a blow that merely infuriates the enemy, what good is it? Less than none, in my opinion. If we strike, we must drive the sword home all the way to the hilt. Let the Americans worry about defending their west coast. If they lose Hawaii, they cannot possibly think about striking us. Again, Admiral Yamamoto showed nothing of what he was thinking. He asked, how many men do you suppose we would need to subdue Hawaii after the airstrike? If all goes well, they should be flat on their backs by then, Genda said. One division should be plenty, 10 or 15,000 men. No. Now Yamamoto shook his head. His eyes flashed angrily. Genda realized he'd overlooked something. Yamamoto spelled it out for him. The Americans keep 2 divisions of infantry on Oahu. Even with air superiority, one of ours would not be enough to root them out. If this enterprise is to be attempted, it must not fail. You are absolutely right about that. Genda didn't know whether to be ecstatic or apprehensive. The Navy could have pulled together a division's worth of men from its own resources. For a force the size Yamamoto was talking about. Will the Army cooperate with us, sir? Their eyes are on China, and on the south, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies. They'd never like to be.
All right, so let's click on the X in the upper right-hand corner, and that will get us back to the classroom. So now we've heard 3 audio clips from our titles on Pearl Harbor. This last one, the novel goes on to talk about how the attack on Pearl Harbor was followed up by a Japanese invasion of Hawaii and a conquering of the island, where the Japanese used it to launch offensives against the west coast of the United States. Okay, let's see if you've had enough information here to make a choice. So here are 3 titles: World War II, Pearl Harbor, Winds of War, and Days of Infamy. Which of the 3 titles fit our discussion of historical fiction? You can put 1, 2, or 3. 1 would be World War II, Pearl Harbor. 2 would be The Winds of War. 3 would be Days of Infamy. Which one is historical fiction? 1, 2, or 3? And the correct answer is Herman Wouk's The Winds of War. So again, we have all the major points that happened in World War II, but told through the intertwining story of Pug Henry and his family and how they react to the personalities and events of World War II. Okay, 1, 2, or 3, which one is nonfiction? The answer is correct. Number 1, World War II, Pearl Harbor is our nonfiction selection. So 1, 2, or 3, which is our alternative history? Should have made that a trick question, but the correct answer is, you got it, is number 3, Days of Infamy, because we know that attack, Japanese follow-up attack on Hawaii, did not happen. That their backing away actually, in reality, gave Americans enough time to recover and launch their own offensive, which eventually won the war in the Pacific. Okay, so let's delve a little bit more into alternative history, since it may be less familiar to you than some of the others. So, what happens in alternative history novels? Most commonly, a specific historical event is altered or changed in some way. The losing side of a battle is recast so that as the victor or key figure survives an assassination attempt that succeeded in real life. So again, we're back to that question, what if this happened? Another approach is to shift the timelines of history by introducing technologies or political concepts before they actually occurred in real history. This is frequently seen in steampunk, a time of alternative histories in which scientific advances of the 20th century might make an appearance in the Victorian era. Another variant on alternative history is to envision an alternative natural history rather than an alternate political history, like perhaps some great catastrophe or natural event that changed the way the world evolved. So alternative history is popular with fans because it certainly fires up the imagination. It gives the reader a fun and a safe way to envision a world that easily might have been. Many alternative history books give cameos or even leading roles to figures from the past. The stories allow readers to visit the lives of people in other eras with the understanding that anachronisms are meant to be a feature rather than a flaw or a mistake. Carefully crafted deviations from recorded history gives zest to the storyline. So what we want to do is look at some key titles. If this is an unfamiliar genre to you, these are places where you could start to get a sense of this type of novel and get a sense of why it is popular to readers. So the first I'm going to look at is some key titles from that you could look at. The first one we're going to look at is The Man in the High Castle, written by Philip K. Dick. This is one that we have as a book discussion kit here at the State Library, if any of you are interested in that for a book group. This story blends science fiction with espionage and adventure. This examines life in 1962 in a country formerly known as the United States. In this title, what was the United States is now under the power of Japan and Nazi Germany. The story features international intrigue and is actually a novel within a novel that speculates about a world where the Allied powers of Japan and Germany won World War II. Axis powers, I think. Yeah, World War II. Another important title to give you a sense of this genre is The Difference Engine, written by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling. If you have any knowledge of these and would like to comment, or if you have another suggested title you would like to throw in there, feel free to do that by chatting in your comments or suggestions in the chat box. This book is known as one of the early titles in the steampunk genre, which we talked about before, where modern technology makes an appearance in the Victorian era. It offers a colorful cast of inventors and scientists. In this particular story, the age of computer has arrived early, and several people are fighting to obtain a box of punched computer cards that are rumored to give the owner incredibly amount of power. Is anybody familiar with this one? Third title is called River of Teeth, written by Sarah Gailey. This one is fairly recent, published in 2017. The author bases her story on a proposal that the United States Congress once considered, but then later abandoned the idea of importing hippos to the Mississippi River Valley area. And so in her story, in 19th century America, hippos are used for meat, used for transportation. And so what we have is a heist story with an ensemble of colorful characters, ruffians, outlaws, and ne'er-do-wells, and of course the hippos that they ride. Anybody familiar with this story? Fire on the Mountain. I'm not familiar with the title, but I do recognize the author, Terry Bisson. This title comes from the late 80s. In a world where John Brown succeeded on his raid on Harper's Ferry, the South succeeds and becomes an independent black state. We are given a what-if situation where the nation of Nova Africa, a young woman mourns the loss of her husband who was killed in a space mission. I think this is the one that would interest me the most, and that's the Stephen King title 11/22/63. I think this was actually made into a miniseries or hit, or not hit, but a miniseries or movie on one of the networks. This published in 2011. So in June 2011, an English teacher steps through a time portal in his friend's kitchen and travels back in time to September 9, 1958. And so over the next 5 years in this early timeline, he develops a plan to prevent the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And no, we're not going to tell you what happens. You have to read to find out. Okay, so those are some titles you could use to get a sense of this genre. We're going to turn to looking at some key authors that you might want to recommend or to look at yourself in order to get more information or a greater feel for alternative history. The first one we're going to put up here is Harry Turtledove, who was the author of our Days of Infamy sample from earlier. He's really considered the undisputed master of alternative history. His writing explores familiar themes such as the South winning the Civil War, or the Axis powers winning World War II, as well as more unusual ideas such as the Eastern American coast as its own separate continent. Some of his works are strictly alternate histories, while others incorporate more elements of fantasy. If you can see on our slide here that down towards the bottom there, I've included some of the terms, appeal terms, that you could use in your discussion with alternate history fans in suggesting these authors to them. The characters they have he writes about are usually flawed in some way. His stories are plot driven, very fast paced, very suspenseful, rich in detail. Another key author is Eric Flint. His best known series is A C.T. Shards, in which a modern day West Virginia town is accidentally transported back to 17th century Germany. He uses well-known historical figures commingled with contemporary Americans in action-packed stories. So notice, again, his stories tend to be more plot-driven than character development, fast-paced, very engaging writing style. The next key author we're going to look at is S.M. Stirling. He's known for exploring culture, technology, and warfare in his stories of alternative history. His stories are filled with adventure and daring do. His novels, such as The Island in the Sea of Time series, transports contemporary Nantucket back to 1250 BC, mixes action with thought-provoking social questions. Another key author is Naomi Novick. She's best known for her Temeraire series, which inserts dragons into world history. As intelligent as humans, dragons serve in the military both as combatants and as battleships. In the title Temeraire, Temeraire is hatched from an egg of unknown origins, joins the Royal Area Corps in the fight against Napoleon. Another key author is Cherie Priest. She mixes the familiar with the fantastic in all of her fiction, but specifically her Clockwork Century novels is what comes best to matching our alternative history universe. The setting is 19th century Seattle, the vibe is steampunk, and the inhabitants include desperados, zombies, spies, and inventors. Again, plot-driven stories, fast action pace, really richly detailed writing style, very suspenseful. So, as a reader's advisory, what can you do to help fans that might turn to you at the front desk for some help. The hardest part of helping fans might be finding something that they haven't already read, since alternate histories aren't always cataloged as such. So you might have to think outside the box a little bit. Often, alternate histories and their close cousins can be found in related genres and subgenres. When talking with readers, it's a good idea to find out how much authenticity they want in their history. Historical fantasy series such as Jacqueline Carey's Kushal's Legacy and George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire are loosely inspired by history, but they're not beholden to historical accuracy. So that would not work for somebody who really wants their history to be accurate. Conversely, readers who relish historical authenticity might prefer to explore historical fiction novels with a light speculative touch, such as Nicola Griffith's Hild, about an English girl and future saint with supernatural gifts. Literary fiction is another genre where alternative history sometimes crops up, as with Michael Chabon's The Yiddish Policemen's Union, in which Alaska becomes the homeland for Jews, and Susanna Clarke's Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, in which 19th century magicians grapple with the diminished role of magic in society. Finally, there are any number of themed anthologies of alternative history stories to suggest to readers who enjoy their fiction in short clips or in short times of reading. Notable trends in alternative history these days: many alternative history books focus on battles, war, and military strategy. The American Civil War and the Second World War are big popular subjects for this what-if type of question and are found in abundance. Another common trend is time travel. This is the variation of alternative history in which people from modern times are plopped into the past. Armed with their foreknowledge from the future, these characters try, with varying degrees of success, to alter the timeline they find themselves living in. So today what we've done is just tried to introduce this to you as a genre or subgenre that you might be asked questions about from various readers in your community. If you're looking for more information to follow up on what we've covered today, some good places to start is Novelist, which you have access to through the Kentucky Virtual Library. If your library is a member of KYVL Consortium, then you have access to Novelist. There's an article called Getting Up to Speed in Alternative History, and really that is the basis of the second half of today's training. Goodreads has a section, Alternate History, gives a very brief description of what alternate history is, and then gives a long list of titles that its patrons have recommended. And then there is a website called Uchronia, which essentially is a list of everything related to alternative history, reviews, authors, books. If this would be a website you would definitely want to know about if you have fans of alternative or alternate history in your area. That is about it for our content today. Just want to remind you that we are here at the Department for Libraries and Archives to be of service. So if you have any questions, you should always feel free to give us a call. In Frankfurt, 502-564-8306 is the number direct to the reference desk. We do have a toll-free number for those of you outside of Frankfurt, where you can use that number toll free. Staff is here to respond to phone calls and emails 8 to 4:30 Monday through Friday. If you're in town and you want to come by and visit and ask your question, the building is open 9 to 4. Want to remind you to check out the training events calendar. Lots of opportunities to learn new skills, to learn about new topics. Many of the webinars are recorded and are archived on the KDLA website. You can listen to those and fill out a learning activity report to get credit for those for continuing education. You will get a follow-up email. So let me get my ducks in a row here. So the first thing we would like you to do is take a survey about today's class. I've put up a box on your screen. If you will click on where it says Alternative History Survey, the Browse To button will light up, and just like you did before, if you click on that Browse To button, it will take you to a short survey about today's class. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to do that now. Click on Alternative History Survey and then take the survey. Okay, if you're back in the classroom, you see I've put up a second box that has stripes. This is the last thing to do today. If you are interested in making a copy of today's presentation for Valerie and myself today, I hope you got some information that you didn't know before, and that you will be inspired to go out and look at some of the titles and some of the authors that we mentioned for you today. We will be back after the first of the year with some more tantalizing training topics, and hope that you will join us again when we have trainings after the first of the year. Valerie and I will remain in the classroom for a couple of minutes for those of you who are working through the survey still, and those that might want to download the presentation. Have a good day. Have a happy and safe holiday time. Enjoy being away for work for a brief time. Enjoy your families, and we'll see you the next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.